Welcome. We're delighted to have a full house today, and I understand there's a good crowd developing in the other room for this, which is now the fourth in a series of free CLE programs provided by your Nashville Bar Association in an effort to acquaint the members, both young and old, with some events in our legal history that you've all heard of, but maybe don't know everything that there is to know about it. Our hope is today that we will illuminate some of you, that we will maybe show you a few things you didn't already know, and if nothing else, excite some more interest in history and CLE programs of this type. I want to thank and recognize the President of the Nashville Bar Association, Nathan Ridley, who is here, and the Chairman of our Historical Committee, Emily Schaus, and the members of the committee are in the room, and many of the participants in our CLE program today are members of the Historical Committee who almost exactly 5 years ago started these programs with a presentation on the landmark case of Baker versus Carr. On Tuesday, February 25, 1975, the Nashville Police Department had a problem. A 9-year-old Girl Scout in Green Hills was missing, and no one seemed to know how it happened. For 33 days, the city was in a collective turmoil, and the news media began to indulge in drama and speculation as the story wore on day after day. Then on Easter Sunday, March 30, the missing person case became homicide, as Marcia Trimble's strangled body was found in a neighbor's garage. The turmoil continued, however, as police, media, and citizens all asked the same questions. How did the dogs and the searchers miss the body? How long was she in the garage? When did she die? And the most vexing question of all, who did it? Listen to Sherman Nickens, former homicide detective and the first police officer in Nashville, to learn about the disappearance of Marcia Trimble and what he said about the phone call he got on that night.
A long time ago, my wife at the time, she and Virginia had worked together, or were good friends. And Charlie and I became friends over the year because I had some equipment, and I used to buy equipment parts from Charlie Trimble. And on these construction jobs and everything, he'd come around, and he and I got to be pretty close. And so I went in one evening about dark, real cold. And Dot, my wife at the time, said that Charlie Trimble wants you on the phone. So he said, Sherman, he said, my daughter's disappeared. I said, what do you mean? It was about dinner time. It's getting dark. So I said, okay. He said, we'll get ready to eat dinner, and her grandmother's here, and we can't find her. I said, well, this a kid. I said, why don't you go out in the neighborhood? They lived in a pretty elite neighborhood out there on Copeland Avenue. And look for her and do one or two things. He said, and he did what I said. And I said, if you don't find her, you call me back. So in a few minutes, he called me back. I had a gut feeling. So I got in the car, and I called the homicide division and told the lieutenant on duty, I said, meet me out front, because I want him to go out there with me, And so when we get out there, Virginia, Charlie, Chuck, and the grandmother, they were all there. And so I got to talk to her, and she said, we can't find her nowhere.
Can't find her nowhere. That was the problem. The story you're about to hear is true. Names have not been changed, even though almost everyone who was questioned by the police for 30 years was innocent. We will focus on the conduct of lawyers and the battle in the courts, but we will necessarily concern ourselves with the police investigation and the many mistakes that were made. First, we will go back to Nashville in the 1970s, when almost everything was different. Listen to the description of the 70s from criminal court judge Steve Dozier, who much later would have a great connection with this case.
You have a 9-year-old child back in the mid-70s, crime wasn't like it is today. So yeah, I think it changed things, and I still go through that area sometimes Dorcas and Copeland, and think back of all of what happened within 45-day period of time. It sort of can be overwhelming, and you look around at people that are there now may have no clue as to what went on, but yeah, the native Nashvillians and others that have kept up with it know. I mean, you still think, why her, and why, it's obviously a tragedy that happened that February day in '75.
Then we will examine the various ethical dilemmas that were faced in the investigation and the prosecution of a young suspect. Finally, we will deal with the surprising but chilling explanation of what really happened to Marsha Trimble. First, let's take a trip back in time and let John McLemore, a former reporter for the Nashville Banner, tell us about the 1970s in Nashville. John?
Let's turn back the clock to 1975. Let me put this in perspective. That was 42, almost 43 years ago. Judge John Brown, sitting down here on the second row, was 6 years old and had just passed the bar exam. The downtown streets had been numbered for many years in Nashville, but there were still plenty of people who remembered that 4th Avenue was Cherry Street, and that the Charlotte Pike in the downtown area was Cedar Street. Our family was particularly interested in 9th Avenue that ran right in front of the Baptist Sunday School Board, because that was McLemore Street. Atlanta was the big city in the South. Nashville was a stepchild, primarily because it had rejected heavy manufacturing following World War II. The powers that be did not want any one labor union to be able to shut the city down. DuPont, Avco, Ford Glass Plant all had separate unions. The Teamsters had 2 locals, one for the operating engineers, the men who ran the construction equipment, and another for the over-the-road truck drivers. Detroit had offered an auto assembly plant in the 1950s and had been turned down. We had had metropolitan government since 1962. The county and the city were one, but the employees of the various departments from the old county and the old city governments were still learning to cooperate. It did happen, but it took a gradual change over 20 years. As always, the Cumberland River flowed south to north as it passed through downtown. So East Nashville, the industrial and residential area immediately across the river from 2nd Avenue North, really was East Nashville. Anyone coming to Music City for the first time today will look at a map and immediately conclude East Nashville has to be somewhere along I-40 between the airport and the Hermitage. Across the nation, Republicans and Democrats alike were reeling from Watergate. White House involvement in a break-in at the Democratic National Committee headquarters had snowballed into a cover-up and the resignation of President Richard Nixon. Our nation was recovering from the war in Vietnam. Saigon finally fell in 1975. The space program was looking for Act Two. In 1969, we had landed men on the moon. In 1975, an American Apollo capsule docked with a Russian Soyuz capsule. It was the beginning of space stations. Very few people understood what the miniaturization of computers essential for space travel was going to mean to the world. But a lot of folks thought Tang tasted pretty good. The United States was struggling with inflation and rising unemployment in 1975. The Consumer Price Index rose 12.4% in 1974. It would continue to rise over the decade. The unemployment rate in 1975 was 8.5%. A record 120,000 consumer bankruptcies were filed. But all was not gloom and doom. Things were a lot cheaper then. A postage stamp cost 10 cents, bread 28 cents a loaf, gas 57 cents a gallon. The average price of a car was $3,800. The average price of a house nationwide was almost $52,000, but not in Nashville. It was lower here. Of course, income was lower. The average household income was $13,800. If you had disposable income, it was a great time to buy tech stocks and real estate, blighted houses on Belmont Boulevard, and hippie houses on Central Avenue behind the Westminster Presbyterian Church and the West End Synagogue were fixer-uppers that sold for $30,000 each. There was no CNN, Fox News, or USA Today. We got our news from Walter Cronkite, Chet Huntley, David Brinkley, and John Chancellor. We watched Johnny Carson on The Tonight Show. There was no internet, tweeting, or Facebook. There were no cell phones, smartphones, texting, or apps. We used rotary or touch-tone phones. Bell South charged for every phone in the house, and everyone's sister had to have a Princess phone. We listened to the radio in our cars, but if we were lucky, we had an 8-track or cassette player. Video recording was in its infancy, and we did have color TVs. They were as thick as they were wide. Nashville's big banks were First American National Bank, Third National Bank, Commerce Union Bank, and Nashville City Bank. Not one would survive the merger madness that was to come. With a First American in town and a Third National, most people assumed that at one time there had been a Second National Bank. That was not the case. Although it was occupied during much of the Civil War, Nashville was a Southern city. During its brief existence, the Congress of the Confederacy adopted 3 flags. The last and the official flag of the nation was the Third National Flag. It was from that flag that the bank got its name. The 1970s saw a push by many women for equal rights with men, including the right to equal pay for equal work and equal access to jobs. In 1972, Congress passed the Equal Rights Amendment to the Constitution, which prohibited discrimination on the basis of sex. 35 states ratified, 38 were necessary. The amendment was never adopted. Tennessee and Texas were the only Confederate states to ratify. Miss Rebecca Thomas was concluding her 3-year term as the first elected female member of the Nashville Bar Association Board of Directors in 1975. The legendary prosecution team of Arnold Peebles and Martha Craig Sissy Daughtry had wound up its act in Judge John Draper's court by 1972. What was so special about that? The other 2 criminal court judges would not allow women prosecutors in their courts. Sissy paved the way for the female pioneers of the Nashville Bar Association. Nashville's chapter of LAW was founded in 1981. If you want to know who those pioneers were, check out the LAW website and read the list of charter members. That list is a who's who of the Nashville Bar today. Although the appearance of women lawyers had nothing to do with it, the Nashville Bar Association stopped issuing its rate card to new practitioners. There was a strong feeling by many that a written document stating the minimum one should charge for various legal services might appear to be price fixing. Lawyers were strictly forbidden to advertise, and the Board of Professional Responsibility was created in 1976. 1975 saw a number of firsts. If you wanted to build one, the first microcomputer kit became available for purchase. Microsoft was founded by Bill Gates and Paul Allen. Minnesota became the first state to require businesses, restaurants, and other institutions to establish a no-smoking policy and set aside areas for it. You could purchase a pet rock, which was obedient, loyal, and had low maintenance. President Ford signed and Congress approved the regulations implementing Title IX in college sports. 1976 would see the invention of the first home food processor, the enactment of a law admitting women to West Point, Annapolis, the Air Force Academy, the service academies, and ABC offered a $1 million contract to broadcast journalist Barbara Walters for 1 year's work. Apple computers went on sale for $666.66. Would the Southern Baptist Convention allow that today? Nashville's public school desegregation case went to trial before newly appointed U.S. District Court Judge L. Clure Morton in 1971. By 1975, it had resulted in busing, white flight to surrounding counties, the creation of many schools, private schools, and the blackballing of Judge Morton at the Belmead Country Club. The Green Hills Shopping Center was a strip center, not a mall. It was growing. Kroger had been moved from the north side of the center to the south side. By 1975, it was preparing for its move to its current location. Vanderbilt University had withstood a federal court suit alleging it had intentionally purchased every other house in the neighborhoods along its perimeter, installed foreign students in the houses, and refused to do any maintenance. This allegedly blighted the neighborhoods, forcing the remaining residents to sell cheap and flee. Davis Kid Booksellers was about to open its first store, and it would be in the building that many of us recognize today as Catherine's Plus Sizes. On the entertainment front, Godfather 2 won 6 Oscars. The movie Nashville was released. Jaws became the first movie to gross $100 million. The Way We Were won the Grammy for Song of the Year. CMA Awards went to John Denver for Entertainment of the Year, Dolly Parton for Female Vocalist of the Year, Waylon Jennings for Male Vocalist of the Year. On television, we were watching All in the Family, Sanford and Son, Chico and the Man. We were in the 3rd season of MASH, and who knew the Korean War, which had been over for 22 years, was going to last 11 years on television and into the next millennium in syndication. And in 1975, for the first time, we heard those irreverent words, "Live from New York, it's Saturday night." The governor was Ray Blanton. Tennessee had 2 Republican senators, Bill Brock and Howard Baker. Democrat Clifford Allen was Nashville's congressman. A hard-working veteran tax assessor, Allen would no sooner cross the Beltway into D.C. than his peers would nickname him the Tennessee Talking Horse. Democrat Richard Fulton was Nashville's mayor. Joe Casey was Nashville's police chief. His force consisted of 871 officers and 190 civilian employees. The police department today has more than 1,500 individuals on the payroll. The skyline of Nashville was very different. There were very few tall buildings downtown. The National Life Tower was the tallest. The construction of the Regency Hyatt Hotel, now the Sheraton, had forced the downtown YMCA to move to the corner of Church and McLemore Street. Nashville's population was about 475,000. There was no greenway system, although there were farms and cattle in the city proper. In Green Hills, the Lew family owned the land on Abbott Martin Road, where the Abbotsford is today. Frank Lew's cattle frequently escaped the inadequate fencing and wandered into the shopping district. Nashville had 2 newspapers, the Tennessean, which was the morning and Democratic paper, and the Nashville Banner, which was the afternoon and Republican paper. Competition was ferocious. The papers got the news first. The TV stations came with film at 6 and 10. The Davidson County courts were covered like the Dew covers Dixie by Tennessean reporters Kenneth Jost and Al Gore Jr., Banner reporter John C. McLemore, and Channel 5's Oprah Winfrey. There were no professional sports teams. The Nashville Sounds were not founded until 1978. Having adopted liquor by the drink in the 1960s, the Nashville restaurant scene was improving in variety and quality. Nashville had a far different legal community in 1975. Firm sizes were smaller, and there were no national or international firms. Baker Donaldson, which has more than 800 lawyers around the world today, was Baker Worthington and had 6 lawyers. Waller, Lansden, Dorch, and Davis had 16 lawyers in 1975. Waller now has 237 in 4 office locations. The Metro Public Defender was an elected official with a tiny budget. There was no federal public defender. Lawyers talked with one another by phone, in person, and often over lunch at the City Club and the Cumberland Club. They did not email one another. They did not text one another. They talked to one another. Nashville had its share of crime in 1975. However, people generally felt quite safe. Cars and houses were left unlocked. Parents felt comfortable letting their children play in the streets, walk to their friends' houses, go trick-or-treating, and sell Girl Scout cookies unaccompanied. Then, on a chilly February night in 1975, that feeling of security would come to an abrupt halt.